All right, we're going. Hey everyone. Before I even get started, apologize for the poor video quality. I'm recording from a hotel room at the moment, so my setup is it's not the best. And also, I am not a very technologically advanced person. I'm a bit of a luddite. I don't really prepare things for videos. I talk to you like I'm talking to you in person. That's how I do this. I don't go in with a script. I don't go in with fancy edits or anything. I'm just viewing this as a sit down conversation. My name's Corey Ethan Williamson. I'm an independent author, and my new book, Dragoon, is what I want to talk to you guys about today. Um, it's my second book. It's my first fantasy novel, and I'm doing this video to try to get the word out a little bit. Independent authors always have trouble with advertising, and when it comes to my book in particular, it's in a really weird genre mesh that it's caused me to worry that people won't see it. And I'm not the type of person that's vain enough just to promote things for the sake of making money. I'm going to promote it because I think it's something people would enjoy. My book is a fantasy western, specifically a grimdark fantasy western. What that means is I've taken elements that I like about the fantasy genre, I've taken elements that I like about the western genre, and I've just slammed them together. I've described this book to people at book signings as Fourth Wing meets Blood Meridian. Now, that sounds like a really weird combination. A good friend of mine, Seth, over from Storycraft, has made a whole video about this book, about how the combination works. So I'm not really going to go too far into that. What I do want to talk about is a little bit more about the plot, a little bit more about the world, and how I came up with it. So Dragoon takes place in a fantasy world called Arcadia. And Arcadia is going through a period of westward expansion, very similar to America's period of westward expansion. It's the Wild West. Now, it follows a young man named Hector Hatton, who is faced with a very, very hard choice of basically being hung for a crime of self-defense or joining the military. And he joins a branch of the military called the Heavy Air Cavalry. It is filled up with dragon riders, basically. I wanted to write a dragon riding book for as long as I can remember. I grew up reading the Inheritance Cycle, um, and then later with stuff like Game of Thrones. I mean, dragon riding was everywhere as I was a kid. It was everywhere. But I wanted to do it differently. I didn't want to do just another stereotypical let's ride a dragon fantasy story. I feel like that's been overdone. I feel like it's everything I could say about that has been said already. So when I was approaching this book in the early stages of writing it, I had the issue of how was I going to make it fresh? How was I going to say something about the concept of riding a dragon that hasn't been said already? And the answer came to me in my love of equestrianism and horse culture, primarily because of westerns. So I said, what if our dragon riding fantasy was not in a world that's filled with knights and castles and swords, but a world that more closely resembles America in the 1850s and 1860s? And from there, I automatically went, well, my favorite writer is Cormac McCarthy. I can tell a lot of interesting stuff in the fantasy world that's inspired by the works of Cormac McCarthy. I mean, come on. So I sat down and I started sketching out the lore and the history of Arcadia. And something that became very clear to me as I was doing this was there was no way I could not talk about American history in this book. I'm a very big history enthusiast. American history, Civil War history especially, is a very big passion of mine. And there was no way I can avoid that big of a topic in a fantasy novel set during this time period. So I had a choice to make. How closely was I going to follow our history? How much influence was I going to let real world events take hold over the lore and stories of Arcadia? And what I decided was Arcadia is kind of like the universe next door, where histories rhyme a little bit. You'll have similar figures and similar roles, you'll have similar events, but the way they turn out, the jobs they do, the personalities can be very, very completely different. If you're a big Civil War buff and you're reading this book, you're going to see characters that are very similar to real historical Civil War characters. I have a character very heavily inspired by Custer. I have character very heavily inspired by, pardon me, my cat's over there freaking out. I have a character very heavily inspired by Nathan Bedford Forrest. I have a character very, very heavily inspired by Devil Anse Hatfield. And I'm able to take these characters and almost treat them kind of like archetypes and twist them and weave them into a fantasy story. My goal with Dragoon was I wanted to convince fantasy readers to read a Western and convince Western readers to read a fantasy. And it's been out for about a month now. And so far, that's the best reception I've had. People that bought it wanting a fantasy book have loved the Western aspects of it. My animal's over there freaking out, I'm sorry. And the people that bought it for the Western aspects have loved the fantasy elements. I don't want you to be deterred by the fact that this is not a typical fantasy story. Give it cover up a little bit here more. It is a fantasy story. It follows fantasy tropes. It has the magic school trope. It has a very fantasy protagonist, at least in the very broad strokes of the beginning. But it is flavored with Western storytelling. It's taking fantasy characters and telling a story of the American frontier with them. And I think I stumbled onto something very interesting with this. It's going to be the first book of a series. The series is titled That Damn Lonesome Sky. Um, and I've written several things before. This is my second book. I was primarily a short fiction author before this, wrote for several magazines. And I've never felt as strongly about this story as I felt about anything else. I truly believe that this is the story of my life. This is going to be my magnum opus. This is probably the great work. I what I want to say here. It is impossible to take out personal bias and opinions when you're writing a book. That's impossible. They're going to come in. And I wanted to write a book that talked about the struggles of modern day through this fantasy Western lens. I wanted to talk about corruption. I wanted to talk about the privileged versus the poor. I wanted to talk about what it means to be a man, a young man specifically, in modern society. This is the story of Hector growing up. It's my personal philosophy, and I've told my students this before, that 3 things have got to happen before you can call yourself a man. You've got to be responsible for something other than yourself. You've got to have the loss of a loved one, and you've got to have your heart broken. Those are the 3 things that have to happen before you can really understand what it means to be a man, right? And this book, this first book in the series, is Hector experiencing all 3 of those things. And he's experiencing it in a very, very dark world. This is, I do not compare it to Blood Meridian very lightly. It's gory. It's got a lot of heavy themes to it. It's got a lot of heavy, dark deeds that are done by the characters in it. And none of it's glorified. It's all done for a purpose. I open my book, let me pull it up here, with a quote. It's one of my favorite classical quotes. It's not really attributed to anybody because it's more of a motto than anything. Et in Arcadia ego. It's a quote that means even in Arcadia I am there. Even in paradise I am there. And it's talking about death. Even in paradise, death is there with you. You can never escape death. It's like a memento mori type concept. That's the whole reason I named my fantasy world Arcadia. And the reason I opened the book with that quote is because out of all the themes I'm playing with, out of all the themes, out of the power of corruption, and out of the growing up, and out of the struggle of the working class versus the struggle of the wealthy, death is the biggest theme. What it means to kill, what it means to experience death of a loved one, what it means to understand that you have the capability to give death to others. Why should you kill? Who should you kill? Death is inescapable in this world, and not just the fact that you're going to die, but the fact that you're going to experience death, the fact that you're probably going to cause death directly. So what does that all mean? What does it mean to kill someone? How do you, I don't want to say how do you live with yourself after, but how do you reckon the fact that you took a life with who you thought you were? So I know this is kind of rambling. This is a very impromptu video. I was literally just sitting in my hotel room today and figured, why not make an actual YouTube video? I made this channel about a month or so ago with the intention of doing a lot of these. But they just never really came to fruition. I lost my finger to a snake bite, and then our house flooded, and we had to stay in a hotel for a little while, hence my current surroundings. So the whole YouTube push I wanted to do for Dragoon just didn't really happen. But sitting around today and figured, why not talk about it a little bit? If you like fantasy stories like Fourth Wing or Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, all the modern contemporary fantasy stuff, check out Dragoon. I think you'll enjoy the Western flavoring I'm giving to these stories. If you're a fan of Westerns like Cormac McCarthy's work, or Louis L'Amour, or Larry McMurtry, and you're a little skeptical about the fantasy elements, you can latch on to the Western aspects of this book, and it might trick you into, or I don't want to say trick you, it might convince you to enjoy the fantasy parts of it. It is a merging of my two favorite genres. These genres are both very important to me. They turn me into the person, the author I am today. And Dragoon is a love letter to them. It's a love letter to frontier tales and to sword and sorcery. And like I said, I would not talk about it if I didn't think people would enjoy it. I'm not that type of person. I hardly promoted my first book at all. I never really promoted my short stories. Writing was always just a hobby for me. It is not my career. It is not going to make me famous. I know that. But I feel like this book is going to be something that people enjoy. And I want to tell you about it. If I did not do a good job convincing you, Storycraft, Seth over there, did an amazing 30-minute video on Dragoon. He's turned into a decent work friend, I guess you could say, when it comes to my writing. He reviewed my first book, and he seemed to really enjoy Dragoon. He has some very, very kind words to say about it. I'll try to link his video in the description or in the comments or something. I'll have to figure out how to do that. So if I didn't do a good job convincing you here, check out his video. He does it way more eloquently than I ever could. But that's all I've really got to say, guys. I'll have the link to it in the description. If you have Kindle Unlimited, you can read it for free. If not, it's there as an ebook, it's there as a paperback. If you're skeptical, about how westerns and how fantasies can meld and what that looks like, try it. Don't waste your money on it and try it. Read the first. I think I got the first chapter free as a preview. Read that, see if you dig it. If you got Kindle Unlimited, you don't have to pay anything. I'm not here begging for money. I'm here asking you to check out a book I think fantasy enjoyers, Western enjoyers would appreciate. But that's all I've got for you guys today. I want to try to figure out how to stop this recording. I'm not very tech savvy. Yeah, right on, guys.